Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth. We've got off-season workouts going on down in Tampa Bay with Mac Jones and his favorite wide receivers. No DeVante Parker yet, but Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Agholor, Jacoby Myers down there in Tampa with Mac. We have the DeVante Parker trade to break down. This is the first time that we have spoke since the trade. And we have the fallout of the trade. It's full offseason swing right now for the Patriots. I know the offseason has officially begun, Alex, when we get the first offseason workout montage of the of April here, and as we move forward, that's when we really get into the thick of the offseason. Come May, June, July, when there's really nothing else going on. And all we have is Mac Jones throwing against air to Jacoby Myers down the field. We're not quite there yet. We're going to start with the DeVante Parker trade, but
which just became official, by the way, as we came online.
I was waiting for that to happen. So it just became official now. DeVante Parker, a member of the New England Patriots via the Miami Dolphins, former 2015 first-round pick. Once again, Alex, this is the first time that we've been on the pod to react to this trade. Before we get into all the domino effects and all the where we go from here's, how's your feeling just solely on the trade in a vacuum? DeVante Parker in a 5th round pick in 2022 for a 2023 3rd round pick going back to Miami.
Yeah, I think it's a good trade. I think you can't really hate it. You look at what Parker's upside is, right? Potential 1,000-yard guy, and I've gotten some heat for saying that on Twitter. He had 1,000 yards 2 years ago with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Second year Mac Jones should be better than Ryan Fitzpatrick was in 2019. So he's got to stay healthy, which is a huge if, and we should just throw that caveat out there for the entire show because I think it's going to come up quite a bit. He has to stay healthy. I'm not as concerned with his injuries as some people. I think it's the red flag. I do. But it's not like he's missing huge chunks of time, although he's only played one full season, which is alarming. To put a little silver lining on it, he's never played fewer than 10 games. So he does. It's not like he's not like, remember last year we did this with Hunter Henry,
right?
Where it was, he's missed all this time. Like he had missed full seasons. Parker's never missed more than 6 games in a season. Only one full season. So like you can go both ways with that. That's obviously the big caveat. That's the big if, right? With this, if he's healthy, I think if he's healthy, he's an upgrade over Nelson Agholor. He's now their best wide receiver. I think they're going to have a way to use him. They needed that big body guy, that contested catch guy, guys like that with a very accurate quarterback like Mac Jones you can take advantage of. This is also going to open Kendrick Bourne up to do a lot more. I think Bourne, by default, kind of became their contested catch guy last year in some situations, at least down the field. We all remember, right, the throw from Mac to Bourne against Cleveland for the touchdown was probably
the year.
That was probably the best in terms of like, skill level. That's probably the best play the Patriots made all year on the offensive side of the ball. And Kendrick Bourne's that's not necessarily his skill set. It's great that he can make that catch. I want to see him getting open and then creating with the ball in his hands, right? That's the kind of pass you throw DeVante Parker. And Bourne's what, 5'11", I think? Parker's 6'2". So you just have more opportunity with that kind of throw. And ultimately, they give up a top 100 pick. Well, they moved down. It was a pick swap. It doesn't really feel like that because it's split over 2 years. Maybe they have a guy they like in the 3rd this year. They didn't want to part with that pick. Who knows what the board will look like next year. They'll take their chances next year. They'll get the comp pick, which by no reason means that this is nothing, right? You could have had 2/3 next year. You still gave up a top 100 pick, but move down 80 spots to see if Parker still has it. And Parker's a top 32 receiver in the league if he does still have it. You can't hate that, right? You really, as long as he stays healthy, and if you're worried about that, that's fine. That's fair. As long as he stays healthy, it feels like a pretty safe deal. This isn't just blindly trading a second for Mohamed Sanu and then trying to force him out there on a bad ankle. Like that was a mess. People have compared it to that. It's not that. It's a different move.
So DeVante Parker's injury history is all soft tissue stuff. It's hamstrings, it's pulls, it's things like that. On the one hand, that's a concern when a guy has consistently, especially a skill player, those soft tissue type of injuries. But on the other hand, you do hope that potentially the Patriots strength and conditioning staff can do a little bit better job of keeping him healthy and keeping him on the field. That's not to say that the Dolphins have some notoriously bad strength and conditioning staff, but you just hope that the guys here in New England who were able to keep Hunter Henry on the field, for example, like you said, and yeah.
So if I can just cut in, like Hunter Henry raved about that at the end of the year last year, how important it was for him to play a full season and how much the team helped him get his body in shape to be able to play a full season. Like does it guarantee he's going to play 17 games? Hardly, but that's also not nothing. It's something to pay attention to here.
So here's the thing. The way that I look at it in terms of roster construction is that I truly believe that Bill Belichick looks at wide receivers. I think I shouldn't say we, but I think a lot of people look at wide receivers as wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 on the depth chart, right? In terms of pecking order, and is this guy a number 1 wide receiver? And is he a guy that is the top dog in an offense? And maybe DeVante Parker can half check that box. I don't think he fully checks it just because you don't know if he's going to be out there for 17 plus games, but maybe
when he's out there, I think when he's out there, he checks it.
I think he's close, but bigger than that, I think with Belichick and the Patriots, they look at the wide receivers by roles and by almost creating a basketball lineup for different types of wide receivers, right? You got guys like Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Agholor, who are your wings, a little bit more finesse players, guys that are faster, the guys that play more on the inside. Those are the types of guys that maybe you're 1 through 4. The Patriots looked at their depth chart and said, we don't have our power forward. We don't have our center. We don't have a big-bodied outside guy that can go up and win at the catch point, because that guy's supposed to be N'Keal Harry, but he's obviously not living up to those expectations. So I think when you look at it now, you see a guy that since 2019 has led the NFL in contested catches. This is not a burner. This is not a separator. This is not an elite speed guy. This is not an elite route runner. This is a go up and get the football type of wide receiver. And when I wrote my film review about Parker on CLNS.com, I went back to that throw that Mac Jones had, the interception against Buffalo in the wild card round, opening drive, Micah Hyde going over the top. We talked about the play after the game, I'm sure, Alex, here on the pod. Nelson Agholor never went up for the ball, right? He runs the double move. He gets behind the defense. He creates that separation. Mac puts the ball up there on a platter, and Nelson Agholor is waiting on the football, trying to let it drop in the bucket and drop in his hands. With a guy like Parker, 6'2", 6'3", with his size and his alpha mentality, that mentality of when the football is in the air, it's my ball. It's nobody else's ball. It's my ball. He makes that catch. Does he get into that position? Does he blow by the defense like that? Not necessarily. But when Mac Jones puts that ball up between 2 defenders, he's one of those guys that's going to win down the field and make sure that he's the one that comes up with the football. And I don't think the Patriots felt like they ever really had that consistent of an option in that vein. When I look at the way that he runs routes, when I look at the way that he can be used, I do go back to a 2018 Josh Gordon comparison. I heard the 2014 Brandon LaFell comparison as well. That one is not terrible either, where you're just looking to get a guy that can run that vertical route tree, hitches, dig routes, slants, fades, right? He's going to be a 3 or 4 route guy, but he's going to do it at a pretty good level. And especially the down the field stuff, he's going to do it at a very good level. And they now have a receiving core when you throw in the tight ends as well, where you say, there's some matchups here, right? If you don't have a good outside corner that's got some size to go up against Parker, if you don't have a box safety or a linebacker that can run with tight ends, if you don't have a inside defenders that can hang with 2 good slot receivers in Bourne and Myers, they might not have the best receiving core on paper. They might not have Tyreek Hill. They might not have Devontae Adams, but they have a bunch of different guys that can do different things and are good in different ways. And I think that that's kind of what they're going for here with this DeVante Parker trade. On the one hand, I do have reservations because he's not that route runner that we've seen work here in the past. This is not Julian Edelman. This is not Wes Welker. This is not Deion Branch even, right? This is a true big outside receiver that wins at the catch point. That's not typically what they do well. And you mentioned that 2019 season with Ryan Fitzpatrick. The one difference I would say, I would agree that Mac is obviously a better quarterback than Ryan Fitzpatrick, but Ryan Fitzpatrick's a YOLO quarterback. He's somebody that is a gunslinger that's going to be willing to throw those jump balls down the field and willing to push the football outside the numbers. Is that going to ever be a high volume role in this offense? Is Mac Jones going to give a guy like DeVante Parker 40 contested targets a year? Because that's how you produce in that role, is if you have volume and then you turn that volume into a 50-55% catch rate, and now all of a sudden you have good numbers. Is that ever going to be a big enough role in their offense, or are they really looking at Parker as more of a niche guy that when they wanted to use that role, when they get that one-on-one backside, when they are in the red zone, potentially down by the goal line, they want to throw him a fade or have him box out in tight quarters? Is he more of a niche guy, or is he a volume guy for the Patriots moving forward? I think is something that remains to be seen with this trade.
Yeah, I'd say at the same time, though, clearly having the burner at the X wasn't the answer, right? They didn't get the production they needed from Nelson Agholor there, or frankly, last year with Damiere Byrd. Those two put up very similar numbers, which tells me it's the role. So I guess he could be a niche player and a situational player. I don't think they give up a top 100 pick for a situational player. This tells me that the X role is going to look different this year than it has the last 3 years, 2-3 years, right? That's more how I read it.
So my concern, right, I guess my concern is that although I definitely think that N'Keal Harry has to stomach some of the blame here, right? He has to take some of the reason why, if not the majority of it, of why it hasn't worked out here in New England. But we've talked a lot about this, and that is, did they ever really use him in the best possible way, right? Did they ever really allow him to be the guy that was going to allow him to thrive in their offense and in the NFL? Parker is a similar type of guy. I mean, I just mentioned the stats since 2019, leads the league in contested catches. That's where a lot of his production comes from. I like the player. I like the trade. I think it's good value, right? In terms of 2 years, $12.6 million for DeVante Parker, where you're only moving back a couple of rounds in the draft. That's a great value trade for the Patriots, especially with the way that the wide receiver market has looked. And we'll get to that in a second. This is a bargain of a contract. If the player puts up 800 yards, it's a bargain of a contract. But is it the skill set that all of us have been clamoring for? And is it the skill set that is normally produced here? Not necessarily, but I do think that he has more of a repertoire. And that's a big thing that I'm positive with on the move as well, is that if you look at his short and intermediate route tree, he has that ability to run a hitch, to run a slant, to run a comeback, and build compliments off of just the fade. So that's what keeps guys honest, is if you can run that dig route, if you can run that slant, if you can run that under, now you can't just sit all over the fade. You have to respect the fact that he might break underneath the defense. And that, I think, is something that puts him over the top in that sort of skill set that N'Keal Harry never touched that, right? N'Keal Harry could never build a route tree, whereas DeVante Parker has a multiple routes that he can go to in his bag.
Which was the hope, that N'Keal Harry would eventually become that player, right? It just never got to that point. I would say, look at what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball, right? And they're making all these changes. And I think on offense, Josh McDaniels out the door. We know they're moving on, at least from the traditional fullback. Maybe things are changing on the offensive side of the ball too. Yeah. I mean, that's what we really thought going in. We didn't think they were going to change on defense. That kind of came out of nowhere. We kind of suggested maybe the offensive philosophy might change a little bit with no more Josh McDaniels, and just some of the personnel moves that have been made over the last couple of years. And I think we maybe lost track of that conversation with the defensive overhaul, but maybe this is the new thing. maybe this is it. I think they realized that what they were doing offensively forget the not having the talent, because I think that was only part of it. I think stylistically their passing game didn't make a ton of sense, right? The burner deep threat really only works if you throw them the ball occasionally. If you don't, teams are going to dare you to throw that because they're just seeing on tape you're not going to do it, right? So I think maybe there's a change in philosophy coming to the passing game. I still think they're going to lean heavily on the running game, as they should. They've got a good offensive line. They've got great backs. They play in the Northeast. Like, the running game should still be a big part of what they do. I'm sorry, Evan. I know that rips your heart out. But in terms of how the passing game is designed, I think maybe there's some philosophical shifts coming, and I think it's going to be for the better. And we'll really know after the draft, especially if they take a receiver.
Yeah. So when you watch Mac at Alabama, definitely more of a vertical offense at Alabama. Now, granted, that was because he had DeVonte Smith and Jalen Waddle and all these dudes out there that were running vertical routes. But at the same time, when you watched him at Bama, it wasn't the short and intermediate. He was chucking it, right? I mean, he was throwing the ball deep down the field. The biggest things that he attacked,
and by the way, throwing it down the field to receivers coming out of the slot.
Yeah, slot fades, over routes, deep crossers, whatever you want to call those, and go balls, right? Those are a big part of Alabama's offense. And guys like DeVonte Smith especially, but Mechie obviously in that year too with Mac Jones, won a ton of battles down the field at the catch point. And I think that's where they're going for with this move, is that they do want to push the ball down the field a little bit more, hopefully. And in order to do that, they're going to need some guys that can go up and get it. And I think that that's a big thing that they wanted to get out of DeVante Parker. And the biggest thing is, go ahead.
No, I just think the other thing it does, and this has maybe gotten caught a little bit in the weeds, but I talked with Phil Perry about this when I was on the Sunday Football Show on the Sports Hub Sunday morning. If Nelson Agholor is not at the X, it doesn't mean he's off the field. It gives them some opportunities to move him around. And he really wasn't true. Yeah. He really wasn't a true X until he got to Vegas in 2019. The idea of, because I've talked about this before, like they would run Mechie just vertically out of the slot at Alabama, and Mac was great with that. Mac was great because it's covered differently. It's a little more maneuverable as a quarterback. Take Nelson Agholor, put him in the slot inside DeVante Parker, have Parker use his size to come over the mid. Like, this is, kind of a basic example, but Parker slants over the middle. That clears it out. You shoot Nelson Agholor up the seam like that. Like, that's the kind of stuff they're doing at Alabama. Those big receivers come over the middle and use their size in traffic. You take the quick receiver, you run him up the hashes where he's dealing with a slot corner or safety, not a boundary corner. Like, that's where Mac's success at Alabama came from. It's where Tua, that's the Alabama offense. That's when they're at their best. That's what they're doing. They didn't really have that option in the slot. Meyer's a good slot receiver, but he doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have the speed to play that way. If Nelson Agholor can start taking some snaps out of the slot, that could be big. That could really change the way things move.
Yeah, because I think a lot of us
makes sense. Or
no, yeah, I think a lot of us have been. This is where I was going with the next. Honestly, I wanted to talk about N'Keal Harry too, which we'll get here in a second. But the speed slot role that Nelson Agholor could potentially play, now that they have a true outside guy on the boundary and he doesn't have to do that, it's a big part of this trade in my mind as well. Because, like you said, if you watch Alabama, whether it was Waddle, Smith, Mechie, whoever it was, Mac Jones had to have had, I don't know the exact number. I mean, 50 plus completions off of over routes, right? Crossing routes going over the middle of the field. And like you said, it's a different route, because what you're doing really is you're attacking the safety in the middle of the field, and you're trying to stress. A lot of teams will play it single high, especially against teams that run the ball well, and you get that over route going against a single high safety, and you can run into a big pocket of space on the other side of the safety. And that's a big part of that offense. When you look at it and you say, okay, well, why does Mac throw that ball well? That route, as much as it's not the timing Julian Edelman, Wes Welker option route over the middle, you have to pace it out, right? Because the receiver is moving from left to right, and you have to be able to hit the spot with the ball. You have to be able to throw it to the landmark that both receiver and quarterback are on. So that timing and accuracy is really important in order to make that route work. The one play that I always go back to, two plays, honestly, both crossing routes. Nelson Agholor that big play against the Chargers early on in the Charger game. The Chargers were a big 3. They play a lot of quarters too, but in this instance, they were in 3. And he ran that deep over route against cover 3, and Mac dropped it over the bucket of the second level and right into the window and nailed it. And they got a big play out of it. It was one of the biggest throws of the year that they had just in terms of air yards down the field. That play, I always thought to myself, well, why couldn't we go back to that? Because that looked like Alabama Mac Jones. He stepped up in the pocket, eluded the rush, hit the deep over route, got the big play, big explosive. Where was that? Well, the reason why they couldn't go back to it is because Nelson Agholor was playing outside, and they couldn't use his speed inside. The other throw I always go back to is that underneath drag route that he ran against Atlanta for a touchdown. They just ran that play underneath, that shallow drag, and that horizontal stretch is another big thing. Waddle, Smith, those guys did that a ton at Alabama with Mac Jones. So I think Parker's flexibility and really the best part of this trade to me is that Parker can play the X on the outside, and it unlocks guys like Nelson Agholor. If they draft a guy, Kendrick Bourne, all these guys to play in the slot. And we've seen this trend across the entire league that the speed slot is taking over, right? Tyreek Hill kind of started it, but the speed slot is a huge part of NFL offense nowadays. And maybe the Patriots can tap into that now that they have a true outside receiver, true X in DeVante Parker. And that, I think, fits Mac Jones 110%. Like that's the type of offense that they should be running. I never looked at Mac Jones at Alabama, I guess, is what I'm saying, and said he's the 5-yard pass guy, right? Like he's the guy that you want to throw the little option routes inside and the little flares into the flats to the running backs. I mean, that was obviously in his bag, but I thought when you watched him at Alabama, the biggest thing was pushing the football down the field. And the Patriots just really haven't had the speed to be able to do that at the level that Alabama did.
So, I mean, tell me if this is a jump here. I'm thinking more bigger picture, because you just said something that sort of made this click. It almost feels like, because you talk about the speed slot taking on, right? But the big slot is now a thing too. The evolution of the big slot with, Tyler Boyd's the first guy that comes to mind. I'm sure there's better examples, but Tyler Boyd.
Yeah.
I guess Jacoby would kind of, Anquan Bolden. Jacoby Myers kind of fits in there. By the way, in the video from the workout today, he said he's 225 now. He was playing at 200 last year. He's a move tight end at this point, as much as he's a slot guy, if he's that big. But anyway, I just kind of think, you look at the evolution of the game and the Patriots try to stay ahead of that, right? It almost feels like the days of the small technician, guy who's not necessarily a terrific athlete, but is just so technically sound. Wes Welker, right? Where is that guy in the league now? It feels like you've either got
the closest thing to it is like Cooper Kupp, right? But Cooper Kupp is a bigger guy. Like he's not 5'10".
Pretty big, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like you're going to be big or you're going to be fast to play in the slot. It almost feels like now the true technicians, those guys are playing on the outside, because the outside corners now, guys like Jalen Ramsey, right? Even Trayvon Diggs, J.C. Jackson, they're such good athletes. The only way to beat them is technically. You're not going to be bigger than them. You're not going to be faster than them. So it feels like what teams are doing now is they're trying to get those size or speed matchups in the slot, and they're putting the technicians on the outside to let them work on those guys. Like, I don't know if that's a jump. This is more like projecting, right? I don't know if that's a jump. And this is more than just the Patriots. But it sort of feels like that's the next evolution in NFL offenses. And NFL is a living, growing organism, right? It's always evolving. It's always changing. We talked about a lot of the changes on the defensive side of the ball over the last 10 years on this show here in the last year or so. But that kind of feels like a change that's coming on the offensive side of the ball. Putting a guy like Nelson Agholor in the slot versus a guy like Jacoby Myers feels like they're on the cutting edge by doing something like that.
Well, they're probably behind the 8 ball on this in general, but they're finally catching up, right? Because Tyreek Hill is the prototype for that. I would say, honestly, maybe even a little bit before Tyreek Hill, like Deshaun Jackson was doing that like 10, 15 years ago, right?
That's kind of it. But it wasn't at that point. I don't think he started the trend. I think he just did that, and people were like, "Whoa, Deshaun!" Like you didn't see people copying Deshaun Jackson, right?
No,
I
because
would say it started with Tyreek Hill.
The biggest thing is that the concern has always been that if you put a smaller guy in the slot, he won't be able to take it, right? The wear and tear.
Right.
And Julian Edelman and Wes Welker were unique in how tough and physically capable they were for just absorbing contact, right? But guys like, for instance, like a Tyreek Hill or their teammates now, Jalen Waddle, those guys, you start running them over the middle all the time. People used to be concerned that wouldn't last. Now they're so fast that they just don't get hit because they don't get caught, right?
I think it's a number of things. They're fast. The rules are different. You can't hit them as much, and the defenses are much smaller. They're not like it would be a different thing if you're sending Tyreek Hill over the middle against a bunch of 260-pound linebackers. You're not.
Or
the linebackers are 220, 230.
The days of Rodney Harrison, pre Rodney Harrison, and those types of guys. I think the other big thing is here too, is that when you look at the way that NFL offenses are sort of evolving into this speed slot, it's so much easier to get guys that play inside the formation off the line of scrimmage. When you play on the outside, especially in the NFL, you see so much press coverage that you get held up at the line, jammed, crowded at the line of scrimmage, and you can't get off the line and up the field. But when you start to move guys inside the formation, whether it's motioning them into the slot, having them in there, running them out of stack alignments, which is obviously a big Patriot thing, but also big around the league, go watch, for example, even take Tyreek Hill out of it. Go watch Cooper Kupp with the Rams. Watch how many times Sean McVay puts Cooper Kupp in a stack, right? Where he's behind the point man, and it allows him to just get off the line of scrimmage and not be inhibited at the line from opening up his strides and getting up the field. So when you play closer to the formation, when you play inside, when you play out of a split, when you play out of a bunch, that allows them to protect those guys against press coverage. So now when you have a guy like Tyreek Hill, or even a poor man's Tyreek Hill like in Nelson Agholor, and you have a guy that runs in the high 4.3s, low 4.4s, and he's releasing off the line of scrimmage, and there's no press coverage, there's nobody jamming him at the line, and he's already opening up, and at 8 yards, he's already going 20 miles an hour. Well, good luck trying to keep up with that guy going out over the middle of the field. So that's a big reason why the slot has always been a good spot to put those types of guys, is because they can't see as much press coverage naturally as they do on the outside. So it means the good things, I think, for the rest of the receiving core. And I talked about kind of the basketball lineup and how DeVante Parker's size and that ability, I think that allows you to kind of unlock some of those other guys. We do have to touch on N'Keal Harry, what this means for him moving forward, what the Patriots could potentially get in a trade for him moving forward. And also, does N'Keal Harry, does DeVante Parker, all of that together, how do you feel about the Patriots still drafting a wide receiver, whether it's in the first round, first 2 days, what have you? But starting with N'Keal, what do you do at this point? I mean, do you release him? Do you try to get what you can out of him in a trade? What do you think you could get out of him in a trade? And what's the point of having N'Keal Harry on the roster at this point?
So I think you bring N'Keal to camp. You have him, because remember last year in camp, he was amazing. Do you remember that? We were all talking about the zit. You were all talking about, by the way, I never bought in on this. You were all talking about this is it. He's finally clicking. This is the year. They have their receiver. Do you remember who N'Keal Harry?
Williams a lot in camp,
so I was going to say, do you remember who he was going up against in most of those reps? Juwan Williams. Here's what you do. You bring N'Keal and Juwan to camp. You have him run a bunch of one-on-ones. You hope one of them dominates the other to the point where he creates enough buzz and you move him. I'm serious. I know I sound like I'm joking.
They had that opportunity. So if he makes that catch against the Eagles in the preseason game and he doesn't get hurt, remember he had it in his hands. He lands up, he gets hurts his shoulder. If he makes that catch, I truly think that the Patriots might have gotten something for N'Keal Harry at the end of the summer.
Exactly. And so I'm saying do the same thing again. Put him out there against the fourth string. Yeah. Put him out there in camp, in preseason games. Put him out there against the worst of the worst. He's gifted enough that he's going to shine. We saw it last year. If you put him out there against XFL, USFL guys, he's going to be the best player on the field.
Right.
Put him out there in those situations.
Yeah.
Oh, look at what N'Keal Harry's doing. There's the buzz. You
I don't
get the
think that-
report. The
I don't think
Patriots are
talent
considering.
Yeah, I don't think talent has ever been the problem, right? He's a talented guy. He's an NFL athlete. His issue, I think, is along with potentially off-field work ethic stuff, right? I drive and just want to and study habits and workout habits and all those kinds of things. Beyond all of that, which I think is important, especially here, his issue is just plain old consistency. Like he runs hot and cold, right? I mean, there's moments that you can show people if you want to try to sell them to another team, like you can go out there and you can say, oh, look at this catch, look at that catch, right? I mean, there's actual catches on his tape against NFL talent in regular season games where he's going out there and making plays, but it's just so hot and cold with him that I think his focus, his consistency, his attention to detail, I think all those things are why the Patriots missed on this pick, not because of anything else.
Again, put him out there against inferior opponents. Let him run it up. You get the little reports out there. The Patriots are suddenly considering giving N'Keal Harry a big role in the offense, right? You build the aura, and then you pick swap him. You trade N'Keal in a 7th for a 5th. Like, I'm not saying you're going to get a ton for him, but you could maybe move up 50 to 100 spots on late on day 3, and that's not nothing. That's not insignificant
for another player who's not panning out in his spot.
Maybe right? Maybe it's that. To me, it's the trade is N'Keal Harry in a 7th for a 5th. You can do that. Call it a win. You walk away. I think that's what you're going for.
I would just, as they said in the chat, I would just start sending teams that catch against the Colts last year in the regular season game, right? Start sending it to teams. Say, hey, look, we just didn't throw him the ball, right? Because he wasn't our type of guy. But if you throw him the ball downfield and he's one-on-one with the DB down the field, look at what he can do. He can go out there and make these catches. If that's part of your offense, if you are a chuck it and duck it type of offense, then he can potentially produce a little bit better in your scheme than ours. That's the selling point. Will a team buy it? Will a team buy it? That's a whole nother question.
That's what I'm saying. Let him go Moss Chuan. Let him go Moss Chuan for 3 weeks in camp.
Yeah. I think more importantly than what did the Patriots do with N'Keal Harry? I think we all are aware that N'Keal Harry is not a part of the future in New England, whether it's by trade, release. He's on the last year of his contract. They're obviously not picking up his 5th-year option. Moving forward in the draft, the Patriots have always been reluctant in using premium picks on wide receivers. They've only drafted 7 guys in the top 100 in the Belichick era, 1 guy in the 1st round. How do you think that the DeVante Parker trade, I think on some ways the DeVante Parker trade makes it so you don't need to draft a wide receiver early, but I'm still going to make the case that they probably should draft a wide receiver early. But where do you fall on this prism? Because they haven't had good success with it. They don't necessarily have an opening immediately on the roster for that guy to play. But I think for market purposes, right, for value purposes, there's a really good argument that says that they still need to add wide receivers and continue to look at that position.
All right, let me start with this. Jameson Williams, we need to stop with Jameson Williams, okay? I posted my mock draft. I traded down from 21. Passing on Jameson Williams, rough look. You can't pass on Jameson Williams. What are you, an idiot passing on Jameson Williams? If he's there at 21, they should run the card up to the table. Right. I don't think he's there at 21. I don't think people understand. Like, Jameson Williams, had he not gotten hurt in the national championship, is a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
There's no debate about it. He is a top. He would have been, right. He would have been the top receiver in this class. It wouldn't be close. He's going in the top 10. We're not even discussing it. And
not only because imagine if he didn't get hurt in that national championship game, what his stats would have been in that game. I mean, he was already
rolling in that game too.
Yeah. He was already off.
He's not going to be there. He's not. He's already running. Like, the injury looks like less and less of a concern. He's not going to be there. If he's there, again, run the card up. I'm not saying they shouldn't take him. I'm just saying stop using Jameson Williams at 21 as like a default thing. I know sometimes he's there on the PFF simulator. He's not going to be there. He's just not.
Yeah.
That all being said, should they take a receiver in the first? I still think receiver is kind of that luxury need. I think, this is a great receiver class. They won't pass on a receiver. You mean like last year when it was a great class and they passed on a receiver, or the year before when it was an all-time great class?
It's a deep wide receiver class. It's a deep wide receiver class.
So
I wouldn't say that it's
at this point.
There's no Calvin Johnson. There's no AJ Green. There's no Julio Jones.
Well, there's Jameson Williams. At this point,
he wasn't hurt, right?
At this point, it's all average, right? At this point, I think these classes are all average. Like the class next year is going to be just as good. It's a great class next year. You've got Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers. You got next year will be loaded too. I think they bought themselves time by this deal. I think, they can address a much bigger need in the first round, whether it's corner, whether it's a linebacker, an edge rusher. I was going to say whether it's tackle looking ahead or whether it's guard.
Tackle.
They can address that need. I'm not against taking a wide receiver high. You mentioned value. I look at it. If Parker pans out, he's under contract through 2023. They have their big outside receiver. Jacoby Myers is a pending free agent. And if Jacoby Myers catches 85, 90 passes again, he's going to get paid. Like, he's going to get a big, fat contract. And I don't think it's going to be here. I look at Sky Moore in the second round, John Mechie in the second or third round,
right?
Bo Melton later. Like, I'm looking at, I think they should take a wide receiver this year. I want to get the slot guy. Go get the slot wide receiver who's going to learn from, and by the way, they don't have any depth behind Jacoby either. So they need somebody to back him up. I guess maybe Christian Wilkerson, but not really. Go get the slot guy this year. That guy backs up Jacoby. He takes over next year. And then next year, you do the same thing on the outside. Next year, you take the outside guy who will have a year behind Parker, and then you go from there. So, if they take Jameson Williams 21, great pick. Excellent pick. But I'm more interested in slot guy on day 2, maybe early on day 3. Like, that to me is the sweet spot for wide receiver for them in this draft. I think, Sky Moore in the second round would be great. I think all things considered, if they can get John Mechie, end of the second, I think it's probably ultimately going to be end of the second. I think they either have to take him at 54 or move up to get him. I don't think they're getting him at 85. But if they can figure out a way to get John Mechie in the second round, that, like, all things considered, is the perfect wide receiver pick for me in this draft. I'm all about that one.
I think it's perfect for them too, because they don't need to rush him back from the ACL. They don't necessarily need him to contribute this year coming off the injury. So it's really a pick for 2023 and beyond. I love the Mechie combo as well, but what I want to talk about is the value of this. And this is the pitch. If you're one of those people that wanted to draft a wide receiver beyond just the fact that you want the shiny new toy, you think the offense needs it, you think you need to keep up with the arms race. The biggest thing is that, and the easiest way to describe this is 2 doors, right? Door number 1 in the NFL right now, to get an elite wide receiver talent on your roster, is at a bare minimum, you got to pay the guy $23 million a year. On average, that's what the elite wide receivers are making per season, $23 million, which right now, until they have to pay Mac Jones, would be the most expensive player on the Patriots roster, right? If they were to add a guy like that at the top of the roster. The other thing that you have to do there is that those guys, the true number 1 elite guys, they don't hit free agency. They don't get into unrestricted free agency. So you have to trade for them. You have to trade a first and a second round pick for Devontae Adams. You have to trade 5 picks for Tyreek Hill. You have to pay draft capital and investment in dollars and real contract dollars for that player. That's door number 1. Door number 2 is you can overpay for guys that are good but not great in free agency. Nelson Agholor, Christian Kirk, 29-year-old Allen Robinson for $20 million a year. That's the other option. And the Patriots, quite frankly, have been more into that, trying to find the best value in that door right now, right? Agholor, Bourne, Parker, that's kind of where they've been living. Door number 3 is that the best non-quarterback bang for your buck right now in the NFL is a wide receiver on a rookie contract, a productive wide receiver on a rookie contract. Those guys are making a fraction of what they are truly valued at on the open market. And it's not just guys at the top of the draft, because I think that's where this sort of gets skewed, is that you look at it and you say, okay, well, obviously if the Patriots could draft in the top 5 and get a Jamar Chase level talent at wide receiver, then that's a great return on investment. But if you even look at where the Patriots are drafting at 21, that's right in the range of CeeDee Lamb. That's right in the range of Justin Jefferson a few years before that. Those guys are such tremendous value on their rookie contracts that you don't necessarily need to pay the $23 million to have that number 1 production. So in a lot of ways, just like we talk about, oh, well, the Patriots have this great thing going with Mac Jones on his rookie contract. The other great thing that they could have going is a wide receiver on the rookie contract, because you're not going to get that elite level talent unless you go through door number 1, which is pay through the nose for it in multiple ways, or you go through door number 3 and you invest a draft pick in it. You got to get it right. That's a big part of this. You got to get the pick right in the draft with any position. But that's the selling point. If you want to follow the money and you look at what the surplus value is in drafting wide receivers early in the draft, it's tremendous, because those guys that produce over 1,000 yards are getting paid $15+ million a year, and you're getting them for 5. And right. That's tremendous value. So if you're Bill Belichick and you're sitting there and you're saying, well, I'm never going to go through door number 1. I'm not going to pay 5 picks and $30 million for Tyreek Hill. And I'm not disagreeing with that. Like, I think that's probably not the best way to go. But if you're never going to go through door number 1, the only way that you're going to get that level of comparable talent is to go through door number 3. And if you keep on just ignoring the draft at the wide receiver position, you are never going to get the guy. I'm not necessarily saying that they have to take a guy at 21. But I do think that they need to take a guy with a premium pick. And you mentioned that, okay, you have DeVante Parker under contract for next year. That's your outside guy. Sure. The inside guys are a little bit more murky. Nelson Agholor, inside, outside, whatever you want to call him, free agent. Jacoby Myers, unrestricted free agent. You still have Kendrick Bourne on a contract. So no matter what, when you look at it from a long-term prism as well, you're going to need to add a wide receiver here in the next 2 years. Right. On this team.
You need to add 2.
Yeah, at least. You have, in all likelihood, you're probably trading or getting rid of N'Keal Harry. Gunnar Olszewski is gone. So you only have 4 wide receivers on the roster anyway. There's a spot for one anyways in this year's draft class. I understand the reservations. I understand they have other needs. But I think when you look at it across the board, you have to get, at some point, the Patriots have to get a young wide receiver, a productive guy on a rookie. Like, how many of these guys are going to come into the NFL through the draft before they get one of their own, right? It's just crazy
right,
to look across the league at how many of these guys have coming in. And I think the biggest thing for the Patriots when it comes to wide receivers, and this is the end of my rant here, isn't necessarily that they don't know how to evaluate wide receivers. It's that they don't actually try that hard to draft wide receivers. Because if you look at the teams that are the best at this, the Steelers, teams like that, they also have great investment at the position. So at some point in time, you have to invest in that position in order to get something out of it. And if you just keep on looking for 7th round guys like Trey Nixon or looking for UDFAs like Jacoby Myers, you're not going to be able to ever get where you need to go. And that's the game nowadays. Do you want to trade the capital that the Raiders or the Dolphins gave up for their guy? Or do you want to take a stab at 21 on Chris Olave and hope that he turns into your guy? I mean, those are the 2 options that you have. My guess is, though, is that Bill Belichick probably thinks that wide receivers don't matter to a degree and thinks that all of it's overrated. But I do think that in today's game, you need to keep up a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it's some of it's the way the board falls too, right? Just because you take a wide receiver in the first round doesn't mean he's going to be that guy.
Right.
And I don't know, with the momentum they built last year, I don't know that this team can afford another N'Keal Harry situation where they can afford to miss. So let's say they like Olave, they like Williams. Those guys are gone. should they force Jahan Dotson if they don't believe in him just to get that guy? Like
No.
that's again where I think
that's the benefit of the DeVante Parker trade to me is
Right.
that if you're not 100% convinced that the guy that you are thinking about taking is going to pan out for you, and I know you're never 100% convinced, but you know what I mean. If you're
Right.
not really confident about it, now they don't have to reach on a wide receiver because they have enough NFL talent on the roster to not have to reach. But if Jameson Williams is there, if Chris Olave is there, if you get into the second round and you're on the clock at 54 and Sky Moore is there, or you feel great about John Mechie and his health and his evaluation, now you can find the right marriage between the board and what you're looking for and line those things up. But you got to take some stabs. Like, you can't just sit back and not do it at all. It doesn't have to be in the first round, but you got to start to take some bites at the apple here.
So again, that's like, I agree with you, but there's a fine line between that and it's just forced, like, picking players for the sake of picking them without going off the evaluation. Right. That's why, again, and I think day 2, early on day 3 is the spot to go. And for all of their issues with receivers, big picture, they've been okay with slot guys. Granted, a lot of them were undrafted, but Edelman's, I guess, his own thing, if you want to say that.
7.
But they found Myers. They found Braxton Berrios, who's turned into a decent player, right? No, I don't say Edelman undrafted. Edelman was a quarterback, is what I meant.
But Deion Branch in the second round is probably their best pick ever. Like, I know Edelman is their best wide receiver pick.
Well, just even drafted, recently, I would say. I mean, would you say Braxton Berrios is a starting caliber slot receiver? I don't know that he's an all-pro, but
he's a slot receiver. Yeah, as slot receiver.
Would you say he's a top 32 slot receiver in the league?
Probably, yeah.
Right. Okay. So in the last 5 years, in the time we've been on the beat, they found 2 starting caliber slot receivers in Myers and Berrios, right?
Yeah.
I trust that if that's what they're going to do, I trust them more in the slot than I do on the outside. I like this slot draft, especially rounds 2, 3, 4. That's where I want to see him take the receiver. Go get an immediate day 1 playmaker or a potential franchise left tackle in the first round, right? That's unless it's Penning, which I'd be into Penning. Unless it's Penning, based on who we think is going to be on the board, go get somebody who's going to be a factor year 1, week 1 in the first round. And then on day 2, go get the slot guy. That to me is that's the picture.
Well. Yeah. I just finding the sweet spot on the inside guy in day 2, I think is going to be a little bit difficult unless they're all in on Mechie, which I think we would all be fine with. He's really the best one there. I like Khalil Shakur from Boise State too. What my concern is with guys like Sky Moore and Khalil Shakur, who I think are both good players, Sky a little bit higher, obviously, than Khalil Shakur, is for them personally, not very good 3-cone testers, not very good agility testers in general. In the past, that role has always been like a 6'7" 3-cone guy, right? Like Julian Edelman, Welker, Amendola. I think Deion Branch probably ran a great 3-cone back in the day. So those 2 guys did not test particularly well in agility testing. So they're more vertical slot receivers as well. I don't know if they're necessarily the jitterbug types, but we talked about it earlier in the show, and maybe that's where they're going, right? Maybe they're going away from the true underneath jitterbug, and they're going into more of a vertical element in that role. So
how about Wan'Dale then?
I love Wan'Dale. You know my concerns with Wan'Dale. My concerns with Wan'Dale is usage and length, right? He doesn't have long arms. He's got a really small catch radius. And early on in his career, and maybe if you're going to develop him behind Jacoby and you don't necessarily have to put him out on the field week 1, it will be a little bit better. But what does his role look like without a true offensive coordinator, right? Are they going to be able to use him properly before Troy Brown gets with him in the bag and gets his route running to where it needs to be for him to be a true slot? Where are they going to use him? How are they going to use him? That does, concern me a little bit, especially with their coaching staff.
I'm just like, because the other thing too, when you've seen it outside of one pick in Kyle Duggar, they've been Rutgers, Alabama, Oklahoma. I mean, they're going for blue chippers, whereas that's kind of where I wonder if they'd have paused. Sky Moore, Western Michigan, Khalil Shakir, Boise State, Wan'Dale Robinson, Kentucky, SEC, a good Kentucky team. Another thing, and this isn't just the Patriots, a lot of NFL teams do this. And it's something to watch leading up to this draft. When you see programs that aren't traditionally dominant, right? And Kentucky's not traditionally dominant in football. They're an SEC school. They're towards the bottom of the SEC. When you see programs that aren't traditionally dominant go on these 3 to 4 year runs where they suddenly get themselves on the map, a lot of times NFL teams will see that and see, okay, there's a player or players in that class that sparked this, both on the field and off the field, because a lot of that is culture too, right? And Kentucky's coming off a pretty successful 3-year run here. And there's a lot of Kentucky guys in this draft that make sense for the Patriots. Wandale, Darian Kennard, Josh Pascal, Yusuf Corker. There's a ton. I know there's more, but anyway,
from Kentucky, Marquand McCall too.
Marquand McCall, thank you.
Yeah.
Kentucky's one of these schools where they were kind of a basement team, the SEC. In the last 3 years, they really got it going. And
they kind of remind me of UNC in the ACC a little bit, where like they have so much NFL talent, but they haven't necessarily hit that stride in terms of being a ranked team.
That's because they didn't have a quarterback.
They're
a pass-heavy offense without a quarterback. Where's Sam Howell supposed to go again? Thank you.
Yeah. But just like that UNC team, like 2 years ago, Adimi Brown and the running backs, and like that team was absolutely loaded with NFL talent. This Kentucky team feels kind of the same.
They really do. But again, it's that this year's class that's coming out established that, right? Somebody brought up Cincinnati. Cincinnati's another really good one. Cincinnati's coming to the end of this
really
run. Obviously,
well
they're the first non-Power 5 school. Like that's a 3-year run that pops out compared to what Cincinnati normally is. So teams are going to look at that and say, there's something about the class that came in 3 years ago that's special. I'm trying to think of other examples that are on some of those runs. Like I can think going back, like the Chip Kelly Oregon teams, right? Like those players shot up draft boards because there was just something about culture during that window that teams wanted to be a part of. Honestly, I think Oklahoma. I think you're going to see the number of draft picks from Oklahoma after this year plummet because that program is going through a monster shift right now. So I don't remember why I started on this, but it's just something to watch when you can go through. If I'm missing one, like mention it in the chat. Maybe I missed it. Somebody brought it up. If there's a program that's not a traditional powerhouse that is on the back end of like a 3 to 4 year, run, teams are going to look at that. And there's players that maybe would be like late day 3 picks that move up into the middle of that round, or maybe 3rd round picks that move up into the 2nd round, or things like that, because teams want to tap into whatever that recruiting class did to help elevate that program.
By the way, in the chat, we took Christian Watson in our mock draft on Thursday, and our guy D22 wasn't there. He didn't see us take his guy. Come on. I see people in the chat talking about Christian Watson. We talked about him a lot on Thursday. We drafted him in the 2nd round. I like Christian Watson too. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give you 2 more of these programs that are on rises right now because I just pulled up the top 23 actually that I remember. Oklahoma State. I think it's a really big year for Oklahoma State guys in the draft.
You've had some good NFL players before this too.
They have, but they kind of went through a lull a couple of years ago, and they're kind of back now. Houston.
Oh, yeah.
Houston had a great run.
We haven't talked about Marcus Jones much on the pod yet, but we will.
Marcus Jones, Taylor Hall, like that. Even to Eric King, who ultimately transferred coming out of Miami, and he met with the Patriots. Houston just had a massive culture shift. They were, a fringe mid-major team, not mid-major, group of 5 team. They're now moving to the Big 12. They just had a great run. The other one, Evan, you're going to laugh at me, and this is maybe more next year than this year, but there's a couple guys from this team in this draft. Coastal Carolina.
No. Well,
Isaiah Likely, Jeffrey Gunther.
I love watching Coastal now. This is sort of something that I like to do a little bit in the off season, is watch teams whose schemes are just way ahead of the curve in college, because more so when they had McDaniels, but even now, they'll probably dip into some of those college offenses to try to pull some things. It's not like they're going to reinvent their whole offense around a team like Coastal, but Coastal's scheme, wide open, zone run based, obviously, but a lot of the things that they do at Coastal is all the trends, right? Like that's like what all the nerds want everybody to do, is what Coastal's already doing. They're really ahead of the curve type of team and type of program. It's a really fun team, especially on offense, to watch them play.
So again, what I'm saying, like, and I know we're kind of off the rails here, but this is what we like. This is the best content on the show. When we get into like the theory of how teams are built or how schemes are built, I think that's when we're really in our bag on this show. So there's, I think, three coast. I'm trying to pull it up. There's 3 coastal players in the draft this year. Isaiah Likely, who's a local kid, by the way. Jeffrey Gunter, who's a day 3 edge rusher. And I can't pronounce his name. They have a wide receiver who's supposed to go in the 7th round. Next year, dude, Grayson McCall should be a top 5 quarterback off the board. Anyway, my point being, Coastal was an FCS program not that long ago. And they had in 2020 the game against BYU, Mormons versus Mullets. They got on the precipice of the college football playoff. They had another great year this year. If I'm an NFL team, I look at that program who went from nothing to becoming one of the most, must-watch programs in college football. And those guys love playing there. You can tell. They love playing there. They love playing for the coach, all that. I look at what happened there and think, I want some of that in my locker room. How do I grab a guy who enjoys playing football and has that much buy-in? How do I get somebody with that mental makeup in my locker room? Like, I think Coastal, man, that's going to become like, they're going to have a little blip here as a little bit of an NFL factory, I think, for the next couple of years. And then we'll see what happens, however long the coach stays there. And I'm blanking on his name. Yeah,
fun school. Really quickly before we sign off here, and you can get on me for not liking the Masters and not liking golf here in a second too, Alex. But first and foremost, I gotta get this out. The fact that we are talking about the Patriots taking a guard in the first round is driving me up an absolute wall. This team needs talent on defense. They need talent on the wide receiver position, the offensive skill position, and they are going to take a position that inherently, even if you're Quentin Nelson, even if you're Zach Martin, just inherently does not move the needle. Like, it does not change you as a team. It does not make you significantly better. And this team needs guys. This team needs studs. They need blue chippers. They need dudes, right? They don't need Zion Johnson. I'm sorry. They don't need Zion Johnson right now. When you couple the fact that they need top end of the talent roster talent at the top on offense and on defense, and guard is not a premium position. On top of all of that, you have a trend not only around the NFL, but it's also hit home here in New England that you can get starting caliber guard play on day 2 and day 3 easily, especially in a deep offensive line draft like this one. Joe Tooney, 3rd round pick. Shaq Mason, 4th round pick. Ted Karras, 6th round pick. David Andrews, undrafted free agents at center. All great players on the interior. Go look at Kansas City and how they rebuilt their offensive line last year. Much better than the year before. All day 3 guys besides I'm blanking on the center.
Landon Dickerson was not a day 3 guy.
No, Joe Tooney.
Not Landon Dickerson. Creed Humphrey.
Creed Humphrey was a day 2 guy. Day 2.
Was he? I thought he was day 1.
I'm pretty positive. You have built this offensive line.
Joe Tooney, I know Joe Tooney was picked in the 3rd round, but they had to pay him a lot of money. You're right. Creed Humphrey was 53rd overall.
Yeah, but eventually down the road, you might have to pay that guy. I'm just saying, to find that guy in the draft, there's really there's no precedent or prior history of a guy that's drafted in the 1st round that's panned out versus a guy that's drafted on day 3 that's panned out being so significantly better than the day 3 guy that the team is like multiple wins better because they have Quentin Nelson versus having Michael Onwenu at guard, right? It just, that gap is just so narrow that if you think that Zion Johnson is the best pick at 21 or Kenyon Green is the best pick at 21, then we just disagree wholeheartedly, because that is not going to move the needle for the Patriots. That is not going to make the Patriots compete with Buffalo. You think drafting Zion Johnson is going to help the Patriots in a playoff game again against the Bills or against the Chiefs or against any one of the powers in the AFC? Please. Not going to do anything to help the Patriots in that game. They need to go out there and get premium talent. That's all I'm saying. Are you on the guard? You're okay with the guard in the first round?
I mean, I think you have to see the bigger picture. If they go like guard and then they get Mechie and then they get like Marcus Jones or Tariq Woolen or Zion McCollum, right? That works for me. I'm good with that. They got, some big time playmakers and it's still a need. You have a young quarterback. You need to protect him. You're also going to be a pretty run heavy team. You need good guards. Like if they go guard and then like a project player, yeah, I'm going to feel a little off about that. So I'd have to say the whole thing. I'd love to hear you give that whole rant to like Logan Mankins or Joey and Jersey or whatever.
Logan Mankins, they drafted Logan Mankins, right? And that was the biggest gap that they had all the entire dynasty to win a Super Bowl, right? They didn't win a Super Bowl with Logan Mankins on the roster. And he was a great guard, don't get me wrong, but was Logan Mankins changing the equation for the Patriots, or was he just a really good guard, right? And I think people come at me and they're like, oh, what about Logan Mankins? Oh, if John Hanna was available at 21, you wouldn't draft him. Like, obviously, if the best guard in the history of the NFL was there at 21, I would probably be okay with them drafting him. But in all likelihood, what you're going to get at 21 at the guard position is an above average offensive line.
Everybody just bookmark. Can somebody if you're watching this, write down the date and the time code. I think we're at like an hour and a minute exactly. And when Drew Desjardins is getting blown up in October and Max getting his ass kicked.
But you know that they're gonna take a guard at some point, or a player that can play guard at some point. And I'm totally on board.
Not a very deep guard draft.
I disagree. I think it is a decent guard draft.
I don't want one of these tackles that's like, oh, he's not good enough to play tackle, so let's stick him at guard.
No, I mean, but they
need a guy who can play
along those lines for a second, though. That's exactly what they did with Mankins and exactly what they did with Joe Thuney. Mankins was a college tackle.
Thuney was a guard. Thuney was a guard in college.
Thuney was a college tackle. Go look it up. 100%. College tackle. They moved him inside. Sean Ryan, one of those guys. Jamari Saylor from Georgia, who I had in my mock draft today, one of those guys. College tackles, move them inside to guard because they have limitations at tackle, and those guys are great players.
So let me
third-round guys, fourth-round guys.
So let's say Williams, Olave, Wyatt, Hill. They're all off the board at 21.
Zion Johnson, you're trading down. Point blank.
That's what I was going to ask you. All right.
Yes. If the best player on your board is Zion Johnson or Kenyon Green or Linderbaum, who's a center, by the way, Linderbaum.
Well, Linderbaum's he's not big enough to play guard. That's fine. If they pass on him. Look, I'm not saying I want them to take a guard at 21. I'm just saying there's significantly worse picks they could make at 21. That at least, here's the thing.
The only worst pick that they can make at 21 is running back. That's it. They can literally make.
What if they take an edge rusher? So if they take an edge rusher and then bury him behind Uche and Perkins and all these guys, like they've done on day 2.
What you do with them after the fact is different. If they take a guy like Jermaine Johnson,
that's part of the picture. That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, that's fine. If they of all the positions in theory, yes, guard has the least value, but that's not. You have to factor in the intent. Also, by the way, you just said running back is the worst pick. I'm holding you to that. You'd rather take a rise at 21 than a guard. I am holding you to that. We have it on tape. Intent, a rise or a guard at 21, Evan.
Guard, but I say it reluctantly.
No. Flip the field.
It's different. It's different. I think we're having two different conversations, right? One conversation.
The conversation you're having doesn't make sense. You can't just say because what you're saying is why don't take a start. Like you're okay if they take a backup instead of taking a starter. The whole thing after what they did in the draft last year, the whole point is immediate impact players, right? Immediate impact players. A guy who comes in and starts 17 games, even if it's a guard, is an immediate impact player. I'm not saying it's my favorite pick,
you're going to beat Buffalo. You're going to beat the Raiders. You're going to beat Miami.
I'm not saying it's a great pick.
You're going to beat all these teams. You're going to beat Kansas City. You're going to beat the Chargers. You're going to beat the Broncos. You're going to beat all of these teams because you drafted Zion freaking Johnson in the first round. Hell no. Hell no.
Here's what I'm telling you.
40-0 again, just like you did last year.
Are you going to beat any of those teams if you take an edge rusher who is buried on the depth chart and plays
What they
20%
do
of
with
your
him
defensive snaps.
afterwards is not part of the conversation here.
But
That's
it has
the thing,
to.
though.
You can't
But
talk about
it's
this
not,
without
because I
that. I
can't
just think that's a
control
dumb
what
way
they
to
do
talk about this.
afterwards. Okay, if you're going to take an edge rusher in the first round and bury him, that's on you, right? That's on Bill. That's on the coaching staff.
They've done
right?
it, but they've done not in the first round. But I don't want to see that in the top 100. If they're going to take an edge rusher, it's got to be you guys going to come in and play right away. I think Josh Uche has upside. I think Ronnie Perkins has upside.
Yeah,
it's the reason.
I'm not talking about taking Nick Bonito in the first round, right? If you take Jermaine Johnson, if you somehow get
Boye Mafe at
the end of the first round, all for it.
And then he's going to sit. He's going to sit behind Josh Uche and Ronnie Perkins.
If he sits behind Josh Uche and Ronnie Perkins, then that's on Bill. That's not on Boye Mafe.
But that's what I'm telling you. I think when we're talking about this pick, I think it has to be the whole. That's the whole conversation. Give me a guy who's going to play 90% of your snaps versus 20. At that point, I don't care about the position. If we're talking starter to starter, then yeah, I think they could go a lot of different ways than guard. Give me a guy who's going to play. Give me a guy who's going to play.
Corners. They need front seven impact defenders.
Agree.
They need a tackle down the road. They need wide receiver help. And you're going to take a guard. And look, I get it. If you think that the guard is generational, if you think the guard is so good that you just can't pass it up, then fine. Then take the guard because he's the best player on the board, yada, yada, yada. I won't agree with it, but go for it. And he'll probably be a very solid player for the Patriots. If they pay him after his rookie contract, they'd probably be a good player for 10 years here in New England, right? But it is not going to help you in the long run beat any of the teams that are in front of you right now in the AFC if you have a guard that's an all-pro. It's not going to matter.
Fine. All I'm saying, and people say I'm screaming for a guard, that's not what this is. The first round pick, pending injury.
I'm not saying reach. I'm just saying if you have a guard, if you come up at 21 and Zion Johnson is the best player on your board, then trade down so that somebody else is the best player on your board.
I would agree. I would agree. But at the same time, I would say first round pick, whether it's a corner, receiver, guard, linebacker, whoever, 70% usage rate minimum. That needs to be the opportunity there.
Talk to the coaching staff.
Unless they take Penning. That's the one exception. If they take Penning and if they think he's a generational tackle, a franchise tackle, and he's going to sit behind Wynn for a year and then slide in, I'm fine with that. Outside of that, has to be a 70% usage rate guy. Like, this was the whole thing last year. We were waiting for an immediate impact rookie. It had been years really since they done that, and they got 3 of them. They need to do that again. They need to. And you know what? I would rather take an immediate impact starting guard than an edge rusher who's going to spend the majority of his rookie year on special teams. That's just that. That's how I feel. That's how I feel. If it comes down to it, trade down. Trade down. I agree with you on that. But whoever they take in the first round's got to play.
Talk to the coaching staff. If a guy doesn't play, that's on them. That's not on the evaluation. That's not on the draft strategy. That's not on the thought process.
But isn't that part of the draft strategy? Don't you have to draft it? When you don't just draft a guy, like not in the first round, maybe in later rounds they do this. You don't draft a guy and then say, all right, now what are we doing with him?
I guess my point is that that's on.
You have to have a plan.
If they don't feel like Boye Mafe can play for them in year one, if they don't feel like, go down the road, Andrew Booth Jr., Dax Hill, Kyrie Elam, whoever it is, right? If they don't feel like that guy can play in year one for them, then that's on them they know that going in, right? Like that's on them, right? My point.
What I'm saying is this has been an issue. This is, I think, why they're in the spot they are. Besides last year's draft, I think they had a habit of drafting guys who they liked without really having a plan, and it throws off the development. N'Keal Harry, Juwan Williams, Chase Winovich, like I don't necessarily think those guys were bad prospects. Juwan Williams didn't see the field until year 3, and I'm not saying if he played right away he would have been great, but that screws with the development. Chase Winovich wasn't a scheme fit. They liked him, but they tried to turn him into a completely different player. They did the same thing with N'Keal Harry. All I'm saying is if you draft a guy, have a plan. And it might be easier to do that at guard than some other positions. That's my point. I'm not saying they should take a guard. I'm just saying I hope they don't just say, well, wide receiver's a premium position, so we're going to take Jahan Dotson and then just butcher Jahan, like with no idea how they're going to develop it or how they're going to use him in the offense. That's all I'm saying.
If you feel like if there's a corner on the board, if there's a player at any level of the defense, like if you want names,
right.
like if Devontae Wyatt or Devin Lloyd or Keir Ilum is on the board at 21 and the Patriots pass on that guy to draft an interior offensive lineman, then that's a mistake.
Fine.
It's a mistake.
I agree. Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with.
If Jameson Williams on the board, mistake to draft anybody else besides Jameson Williams. That's I guess where my point is with this.
Okay.
Is that
that's fair.
You need impact guys that move the needle for you, and offensive line, and we've seen this in New England for so many years. That offensive line is so much about the sum of the parts. The 5 guys working together on a string, seeing it through the same set of eyes, the big words up in the O-line room in Foxborough at One Patriot Place, see it through the same set of eyes. If you have 5 guys, this is why Ted Karras played last year over Mike Onwenu, right? Because chemistry, continuity,
right,
playing together is more important than overall raw talent. So if you have 5 guys on your offensive line that all do it at a good level and all see it through the same set of eyes, it doesn't matter where those guys are drafted. You can put together good offensive line play. But what you can't do is get players at other positions, at premium positions later on the draft and hope that they pan out to be as good as the guys at the top, because that usually doesn't work out, especially nowadays. So that's my main point here, is that I know that the Patriots, especially with Dante Scarnecchia helping them out, is going to be able to find them a starting caliber guard in the 3rd round or the 4th round, somewhere around there, 5th round, 6th round, whatever. Mike Onwenu was in the 6th round. I know that they'll be able to find that guy there. So picking him at 21 just seems like such a waste of a 1st round pick, especially with where their roster is right now. And we've spent 25 minutes on this now. So
it's a good conversation. I totally agree. I think we're ultimately just arguing 2 different points here. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just saying.
I get what you're saying. You don't want them to draft Boye Mafa and have him sit on the bench for 2 years because he doesn't set the edge well enough or something.
Right. Don't just draft a shiny new. You don't just draft a player because he pops on tape unless you know what you're going to do with him. Right. Yeah. That's my point. We're going to draft this guy. He's going to come in. He's going to play this role on the offense, or he's going to play in this package defensively. We're going to give him this assignments. He does, like, basically, here's the thing. When they draft a guy in the 1st round, again, Penning's the one exception to this because I think tackle's just such an important position, right?
Yeah.
When they draft a guy in the 1st round, here's the question that immediately needs to be answered. What does he have that nobody else on the roster has? Right. What is he going to add to the team that nobody else is going to add? We should immediately be able to answer that question.
Is he your starting outside corner? Is he your starting Mike linebacker? Where is he going to play? What role is he going to play in? Absolutely.
Right. So that's to me, ultimately, like, that's a lot how I evaluate at least top 100 draft picks. What is this guy adding to the team? What is his role going to be immediately? What does he do that they need done? That's all I'm saying. Please answer that question with the 21st. I guess my point is technically a guard answers that question, right? Hypothetically, if they drafted Kenyon Green, he's going to start at left guard, right? That answers the question. Now, is that the best use of that pick? I don't think so. Probably not. But at least he answers that question. I finally have figured out how to actually articulate this. 25 minutes.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Answer that question. Yeah.
The problem is I don't think Kenyon Green at 21 playing left guard does you anything jack. Does you jack against Buffalo. Nothing.
You're saying there are other guys who will answer that question, right? There are other guys who will answer that question later in the draft.
Enough good players in this draft that there's going to be a stud at a different position available at 21 that would help your team significantly more in the grand scheme of winning football games than a guard. That's what I'm saying, is that the positional value at the position is not good enough to justify a team that needs talent on both sides of the ball at the top of the roster and just needs studs. They don't have the flexibility. They are not one of these teams that's picking at the back of the first round. Like, for example, of Cincinnati, well, they shored up their offensive line a lot in free agency, but like, just for argument's sake, if a team like Cincinnati took a guard in the first round, it would make all the sense in the world. They have no holes, right? Their roster is great. They're just in the Super Bowl. The Patriots aren't there yet. Maybe the Patriots in 3 or 4 years can take a guard in the first round like they did with Logan Mankins, right? Because their roster was stacked. So they took a guy that was the best player available that had a role day one, like you're saying. This team still needs to just add talent. They still need to collect talent in the draft.
That's fair.
They definitely need to have roles. They definitely need to have a path on the field, but they most importantly need to be that elite level, that elite tier of talented guys. And if that's the way that they need to go, it's not going to be at guard. We went way over. If you want to give me grief about the Masters, you can. Or you could do it on Thursday, which will probably go.
Look, Evan's not excited about Tiger Woods playing the Masters.
I'm excited. I'm more excited about Tiger playing in the Masters, but I'm not excited about the Masters now.
But you say that, but then, like, we're texting earlier, like, oh, I'll watch the back nine on Sunday. Like, that's not what it is. Would you watch Tom Brady only in the fourth quarter in the Super Bowl? Obviously, that's the best part, but
no. But I'm much more entertained by football for the other 3 hours that I'm sitting there.
But just as a sports fan, because you're not just a football fan, you are a sports fan. This is the greatest of all time on the biggest stage. Returning after 2 years off. He's a year removed from a car accident, which he nearly lost his leg.
I'm not talking about Tiger. I'm just talking about the
incredible theater.
Whole thing. Again, like I said to you earlier, if it's the back nine on Sunday at Augusta and Tiger Woods is a shot off the lead, I'll have it on my TV. Until then, I don't need Thursday through Saturday.
It's getting there. It's the process of getting there. That's it's the journey. It's the journey. Like, it's the journey. I know that sounds cheesy, but that's what it is.
No, it's not.
You hate fun. You're not going to get it. I shouldn't have expected you to get it. You hate fun.
Can't. I can't do it unless it's the end of the tournament and there's real stakes. I just can't. I can't get up for it. I just can't. I understand people that like it. I don't know. I can't figure it out. All right. Thursday, I'm actually going to run along with Alex, the Patriots draft board. So if you want me in the room or you don't want me in the room, you can still figure out what we do in the draft on Thursday for our third mock draft of the year, of the offseason here. First one, we got, I think the first two did not go particularly well at the top of the draft.
It's going to go better this time.
I'm going to take a different strategy on this. I'm going to let Alex for sure make the pick in the first round. I think, Alex, you tend to stick more at 21 than I do. I'm like, we're getting out of here, right? There's nobody good left. Trade out of here. We got to take a pick at 21, and we have to be able to find somebody at 21 that's worth it. That's my goal in this draft, in this mock draft. If it doesn't work out again, I'm going to be a little bit upset because we haven't been able to just stick at 21 and take a good player. So on Thursday, mock draft 3.0 live here on Patriots Beat. So come see us then, and you can tell us how awful or how good or whatever you want to do about running a draft board we are. And it's going to be a lot of fun. By the way,
you're not allowed to get mad at me for making trades that are too convoluted. Not after that Eagles-Saints trade. That vindicated me.
When I saw that trade and I saw all the draft picks exchanging hands, I was like, somebody smarter than me that's better with math, just tell me if it's fair or not, and that's all I care about, right? Like, I just don't care.
The Eagles won that. They keep turning Carson Wentz into first-round picks. It's really impressive. Shout out to them for that.
All right. So we'll see you guys on Thursday, mock draft 3.0. We're looking forward to it. See you guys then. And thanks so much for watching. Until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. We'll see you next time, everybody.